The glossy, trifold medical brochure slid across the perfectly polished glass of my pastry case, coming to a dead stop right next to the morning batch of sourdough loaves. I looked up, wiping a smear of flour from my apron. My mother, Catherine, stood in the middle of my Sedona bakery. 4 years and 2,000 miles of total unbroken silence, and there she was, wearing her perfect suburban church smile. She kept her voice low, pitching it just sweet enough for the morning rush of customers to hear, and told me it was finally time to come home. She demanded I liquidate my business by the end of the month. She needed exactly $100,000 for my father's luxury care facility. She made it absolutely unapologetically clear that my older brother Gavin's future inheritance was not to be touched under any circumstances. I swallowed the dry lump in my throat and pressed my calloused hands flat against the cool marble counter. I stared at the woman who had exiled me from her heart decades ago. The time for hiding was officially over. I am 29 years old, and for the first 18 years of my life I was a ghost haunting the hallways of my own home. Growing up in Charlotte, North Carolina, Catherine had a very specific, ruthless system for her children. She never actually raised a family. She managed a diversified portfolio. My brother Gavin was her prime investment. He received the expensive private tutors, the brand new cars, and the endless glowing praise at neighborhood dinner parties. I was the insurance policy, the spare tire locked in the trunk. Toxic parents like my mother never look at their scapegoat child and see a human being with a soul, desires, or boundaries. They see a delayed return asset. They keep you around just in case the golden child eventually fails, or in case they suddenly need an unpaid, deeply conditioned caretaker. They can bully into total submission. Every single June, the second the final school bell rang for summer break, my bags were already packed and shoved by the front door. Catherine would drive me 2 hours away to my Aunt Erica's house and abandon me there for 3 straight months. She proudly told the neighbors I was a troubled, difficult teen who needed strict discipline. She sat in the front pew of her church every Sunday and told the congregation she was sacrificing her own peaceful summers to give me much-needed structure. The truth was far uglier. She simply wanted a pristine, Gavin-only household without the daily burden of acknowledging the daughter she never actually wanted. They laughed at my quietness back then. They called me the easy one, the mature one, because I never asked for new clothes, never asked for help with my complicated homework, and never demanded a seat at the dinner table. They assumed my total obedience meant I was fundamentally weak. They had absolutely no idea that my silence was the sound of me building a life they could never reach. While Gavin was burning through his college funds on luxury weekend trips and designer clothes, I was working. I took grueling back-to-back double shifts at a run-down diner on the edge of the interstate. I scrubbed heavy grease off industrial kitchen floors until my knuckles cracked and bled into the mop water. I took my pay in cash, banded the crumpled bills together, and stuffed them into a hollowed-out dictionary shoved into the darkest corner under my bed. I became an absolute master at playing the obedient, invisible daughter. On the night of my high school graduation, I had $18,000 hidden inside that book. Catherine and Gavin felt entirely entitled to every single penny that entered our house, so I vanished in the dead of night. No dramatic, tearful note left on the kitchen counter. No screaming match in the hallway. The engine of my beat-up sedan turned over in the driveway, and I watched the perfectly manicured lawns of Charlotte fade into the blackness of my rearview mirror. I drove west until the suffocating humid air broke and the towering, magnificent red rocks of Sedona, Arizona rose up from the dry desert dirt. I traded my $18,000 and a decade of calloused hands for this exact bakery. I built a $250,000 fortress out of flour, sugar, and pure defiance, and the entire time only one person on earth knew where I was. Aunt Erica, the woman who actually taught me how to knead dough. The woman who treated me like a child instead of a household chore. She kept my secret completely safe from the portfolio manager back in North Carolina. Now standing in the middle of my sunlit sanctuary, breathing in the warm, comforting smell of yeast and roasted espresso beans, the ghost of Charlotte was staring me right in the eyes, attempting to collect on an insurance policy I canceled a decade ago. I pushed the glossy medical brochure back across the glass pastry case. I kept my voice perfectly level, stripping all emotion from my vocal cords. The answer is absolutely not. Catherine's performative church smile shattered instantly. The skin around her mouth went rigid and paper white. Toxic people simply do not comprehend the concept of healthy boundaries. They only register defiance. And Catherine was not a woman who accepted defiance from her spare tire. She took a deliberate step back, positioning herself perfectly in the center of the morning rush. The line of customers waiting for their morning coffee stopped talking. The loud hum of the commercial coffee grinder was the only sound left in the room. Catherine pitched her voice up, coding every single word in a thick, syrupy layer of calculated heartbreak. "I am just a desperate mother," she announced to a room full of absolute strangers. She pressed a manicured hand dramatically against her chest, her eyes wide and pleading. "My daughter Vanessa is finally coming home to do her duty. Her poor father is terribly sick, and she is choosing this little hobby over her own blood." My father Trevor stood slightly behind her, clutching the keys to their rental car. He stared intensely at the floor tiles, completely refusing to make eye contact with me. He let her weaponize his illness the exact same way he let her weaponize my childhood. His cowardly silence suffocated the heavy space between us. He would gladly let Catherine burn my entire life to the ground if it meant keeping his own miserable peace. My phone buzzed violently against the marble counter. The bright screen flashed my brother's name. Gavin. Catherine pointed a finger at the glowing screen. She nodded toward it, silently commanding me to answer. She wanted me completely isolated, overwhelmed, and humiliated into submission. I swiped the green button and hit the speakerphone icon. I wanted the entire crowded room to hear the golden child speak. "Vanessa, stop being incredibly selfish," Gavin's voice barked through the tiny speaker. He completely ignored the last 4 years of my life. He bypassed any human greeting and went straight for the throat. "Mom told me everything. You need to sell that bread shop and do your job. I have a wife and kids to protect. My money is tied up in the future of this family. Yours is not. Stop throwing a tantrum and wire the funds today." The sheer, breathtaking audacity hung heavy in the warm air of the bakery. Catherine stood there with her arms crossed, nodding along with her precious son's aggressive demands, as if they were reading from a rehearsed script. They were not asking for my help. They were issuing a repossession order. They honestly believed they owned me. Any lingering shred of daughterly guilt I might have harbored evaporated entirely. The blood rushed, roaring in my ears, completely cold and hyper-focused. Staring at my mother's triumphant smirk, listening to my brother's entitled whining, I experienced a massive, solid wave of absolute clarity. They wanted a public spectacle. They wanted to use the crushing shame of a crowded room to crack my defenses and drain my bank account. They forgot one critical detail. I was no longer the obedient, terrified teenager they used to shove out the door. I pressed my thumb firmly against the silent alarm button mounted under the cash register. The heavy glass front door swung open, and Marcus, the off-duty county sheriff's deputy I kept on weekend retainer, stepped into the bakery. His heavy boots thudded against the hardwood floor. I leveled my index finger directly at Catherine's chest. "Escort them off my property," I commanded. Catherine's jaw dropped. Her performative crocodile tears vanished instantly, replaced by pure, ugly shock. She opened her mouth to scream indignities, but Marcus simply stepped forward, his hand resting heavily on his utility belt. Trevor grabbed her elbow, his face flushing a deep, embarrassed crimson, and practically dragged her backward out onto the sidewalk. Through the large front window, I watched them scramble into their rental car like frightened animals. I reached over, tapped the red screen on my phone to cut Gavin off mid-sentence, and went back to pulling espresso shots. Toxic people never retreat gracefully. They just regroup in the shadows. 48 hours later, the bakery was completely deserted. Tuesday mornings were normally my busiest hours, packed with locals, buying wholesale sourdough loaves and tourists grabbing iced coffees. Today, the wooden chairs sat entirely empty. The silence was deafening. My business tablet chirped loudly on the stainless steel prep counter. I tapped the screen. A new 1-star review glared up at me. Then a second one populated. Then a fifth. The reviews were absolutely brutal. They claimed my cream puffs gave them violent food poisoning. They posted fabricated, horrifying stories about finding mold baked into the bread crusts and roaches crawling inside the massive flour bins. Then the landline rang. It was an enforcement agent from the state health department. A formal, anonymous complaint had been filed that morning, triggering a mandatory emergency inspection. Until the state inspector cleared my kitchen, all my lucrative wholesale accounts were temporarily suspended. Catherine was not just throwing a tantrum anymore. She was systematically choking off my sole revenue stream. She wanted to bankrupt me so severely that I would have absolutely no choice but to crawl back to Charlotte, desperate, destitute, and compliant. But narcissists are incredibly arrogant, and arrogance makes them extremely sloppy. I sat down at my desk and clicked on the profile picture of the most vicious reviewer. One glance at the public activity feed confirmed the truth. The account had recently left a glowing 5-star rating for a specific luxury landscaping company in Charlotte, North Carolina. Right below that, another glowing review for a boutique dental practice owned by Gavin's father-in-law. They were using cheap burner accounts, but they were too lazy and entitled to cover their digital footprints. It was Catherine and Gavin. They completely crossed the line from a toxic family dispute into illegal criminal business sabotage. My mother wanted to play a high-stakes financial game, but she completely forgot I built this entire business from nothing. I understand exactly how money leverage and assets work. I locked the front door of the bakery and drove straight downtown to the sleek, glass-walled offices of a ruthless corporate defamation attorney. I handed him the printed screenshots of the reviews, the health department suspension notice, and a detailed timeline of my mother's physical ambush. He drafted a devastating civil lawsuit for malicious interference with a business by the end of the hour. We were not just going to sue her for vague emotional damages. We were going to place a massive, legally binding lien directly on her pristine, beloved house in Charlotte. The state health inspector slapped a bright yellow suspension notice on the front glass of my bakery the next morning. The kitchen went totally silent. I unlocked the front door, sat on a wooden stool near the register and waited. 10 minutes later, the entry bell chimed. Catherine strolled right into the empty dining area. She wore a perfectly pressed beige trench coat, clutching her designer purse with both hands. She expected to find me sobbing over my stainless steel prep tables, desperate to surrender. She fully expected me to write that $100,000 check just to make the nightmare stop. I stood perfectly straight behind the espresso machine. I picked up a heavy manila folder and slammed it down onto the marble counter. Catherine's smug, victorious smile faltered instantly. She glanced at the thick folder, then back up at my face. The skin around her eyes tightened. A tiny bead of sweat broke through the expensive foundation on her forehead. The arrogant posture she maintained my entire life suddenly crumbled into nervous, rigid tension. I pushed the folder directly toward her manicured hands. "Read it." She flipped the cover back. The thick stack of paper inside was not a bank check. It was a formal, heavily stamped police trespass warning permanently, barring her, Trevor, and Gavin from coming within 500 feet of my property. Underneath that lay the drafted, devastating civil lawsuit for malicious business interference. I swallowed the terrified teenager inside me, who used to hide from her heavy footsteps in the hallway. Today, I was the one holding the hammer. Catherine's breathing turned incredibly shallow. The heavy legal paper shook violently in her grip. I leaned across the counter, invading her space, forcing her to look me dead in the eyes. I dropped my voice to a cold, lethal whisper. I forced her to strain to hear every single syllable. "The lawsuit gets filed at the county courthouse at exactly 8 o'clock on Monday morning," I said quietly. "My attorney is placing a massive legal lien directly on your pristine 5-bedroom house in Charlotte. The moment you lose this case, the state seizes your precious property to pay for my ruined wholesale accounts. You will lose your neighborhood country club status. You will lose your flawless social reputation. And Gavin will lose every single dime of that inheritance you tried so hard to protect." Total suffocating panic washed over her face. Her chest heaved. The color completely drained from her cheeks, leaving her looking gray, frail, and utterly defeated. She opened her mouth to scream, to bargain, to launch into another manipulative church lady tirade. The words completely failed her. Her eyes darted around the empty bakery, frantically searching for an escape route. She finally realized the absolute gravity of her mistake. She brought a match to a powder keg, completely forgetting I held the detonator. I tapped my fingernail against the trespass warning. "I do not outshout the room anymore, Mom. I own the building. Get out." Catherine dropped the heavy manila folder. The thick pages hit the marble counter with a sharp, echoing slap. She looked at the polished espresso machine, the glass pastry cases, and finally my face. The absolute certainty in my eyes terrified her more than the legal documents ever could. She realized I was entirely willing to burn her pristine Charlotte life to ashes. Marcus stepped forward from the back hallway and clamped his heavy hand down on Trevor's shoulder. Trevor flinched, shrinking into his beige windbreaker. He stared intensely at his own shoes as Marcus physically guided him toward the glass exit. Catherine stumbled backward, her designer heels scraping awkwardly against the tile floor. She pushed through the heavy door, her mouth snapping completely shut. Through the large front window, I watched them retreat to their rental car. They looked incredibly small, shrinking against the massive, towering red rocks of the Sedona Desert. The silence inside the bakery returned thick and peaceful. I picked up the folder, locked it safely inside my desk drawer, and fired up the commercial ovens. My attorney filed the defamation lawsuit the following Monday morning, attaching the legal lien directly to Catherine's 5-bedroom house. The fallout was instantaneous and utterly spectacular. The moment Gavin realized his precious future inheritance was locked in a bitter legal battle, his fake loyalty completely evaporated. He stopped returning Catherine's frantic phone calls. He blocked Trevor's cell phone number. He publicly distanced himself from his own parents to protect his wife's pristine reputation at their country club. Gavin only ever loved the money, and the second I threatened the money, he abandoned them without a second thought. Trevor remained trapped in Charlotte, suffocating inside a toxic marriage he spent 30 years enabling. He chose cowardice his entire life, and cowardice was exactly what he was left with. By Wednesday afternoon, the state health inspector returned to conduct his emergency sweep. He checked the flour bins, the walk-in refrigerators, and the prep stations. He found absolutely nothing. He peeled the bright yellow suspension notice off my front window and threw it into the alley dumpster. My attorney sent a single, devastating cease and desist letter to the hosting platforms, and every single fake 1-star review vanished from the internet. My wholesale accounts reactivated immediately. The local cafes doubled their sourdough orders for the weekend rush. My revenue stream roared back to life stronger than before. The business I built with my own bleeding hands stood taller and more resilient than ever. Catherine tried to break my fortress, but she only managed to break her own knuckles against the stone. November arrived, painting the desert sky a brilliant, bruised purple. The air turned crisp, carrying the sharp scent of pine and roasted pecans. I closed the bakery for a private Thanksgiving dinner. The front bell chimed, and Aunt Erica walked through the door hauling a massive, battered suitcase. She wrapped her arms around my shoulders, her hands warm and familiar. We pushed 2 heavy wooden prep tables together in the center of the kitchen. 20 people sat around my makeshift table, passing plates, laughing loudly, and spilling red wine on the napkins. The room radiated absolute warmth. This was the family I built. This was the life I protected. I sat at the head of the table, cutting a thick slice of pecan pie for the woman who actually raised me. The gavel did not fall in a dramatic, crowded courtroom. The real justice happened quietly, meticulously, and entirely on paper. The civil lawsuit for malicious business interference did exactly what it was designed to do. My defamation attorney secured a completely devastating settlement. The judge ordered my mother to pay $245,000 in punitive damages and lost business revenue, plus an additional $68,000 to formally cover my legal fees. Catherine, of course, did not have $313,000 sitting in a liquid cash account. The legal lien my attorney attached to her pristine 5-bedroom house in Charlotte was triggered immediately. She was forced to completely liquidate her most prized possession to satisfy the massive court order. The financial ruin was absolute, but the social execution was far more surgical and permanent. The board of directors at her elite country club held a private meeting and quietly asked Catherine and Trevor to formally resign their memberships, citing the massive public embarrassment of the state health department fraud. Investigation. The women in her church congregation, the exact same women she used to gossip with while pretending to be a martyr mother, completely stopped returning her phone calls. She was permanently uninvited from the neighborhood charity galas. She became a total social pariah in the exact suburban kingdom she spent 30 years ruthlessly ruling. Toxic people do not magically change when they lose. They simply change their tactics. 8 months after the house was sold, I was standing in the back office of the bakery doing payroll when the mail carrier dropped a stack of envelopes on my desk. Right in the middle of the pile was a heavy beige envelope. There was no return address, but I instantly recognized the sharp, looping, cursive handwriting. I opened it. The letter inside was exactly 3 pages of pure, unadulterated manipulation. Catherine wrote about how incredibly difficult it was to downsize into a cramped, rented 2-bedroom apartment on the wrong side of the city. She complained endlessly about how Trevor's condition was deteriorating and how incredibly cruel Gavin had been to completely abandon them in their time of desperate need. She did not write a single word of apology for trying to destroy my livelihood. She did not express a single ounce of genuine remorse for the fraudulent health department reports or the vicious smear campaign. Instead, she went right back to the only script she knew. She tried to weaponize guilt. She wrote that she knew we had our disagreements, but she was still my mother. She said, "You only get one family in this life, and you cannot turn your back on blood." She told me it was time for me to be the strong one and help them rebuild. Years ago, a letter exactly like that would have completely shattered my entire week. It would have sent me into a violent spiral of guilt, anxiety, and frantic self-doubt. I would have agonized over whether I was a terrible daughter. I would have wondered if I owed her my forgiveness, just because she carried me. But standing there in my sunlit office reading her desperate, hollow echo, I felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no sadness, just a profound, quiet indifference. I did not rip the letter to shreds. I did not draft a furious reply to defend myself. I simply folded the 3 beige pages in half, walked over to the industrial trash can by the espresso machine, and tossed the envelope right on top of the wet, used coffee grounds. I did not even watch it land. The absolute best revenge you can ever take on a narcissistic abuser is simply going on to live a remarkably beautiful, completely unbothered life. The contrast between the cold, suffocating house I grew up in and the warm, vibrant reality I built in Sedona is staggering. In Charlotte, family dinners were a miserable battlefield of passive-aggressive comments, silent treatments, and endless criticisms about my weight, my grades, and my personality. Here, my bakery is filled with genuine, uncomplicated love. Aunt Erica permanently relocated to Arizona last spring. She now runs the pastry station 3 mornings a week, laughing loudly with the younger bakers and teaching them the exact same pie crust techniques she taught me when I was a terrified, lonely 8-year-old girl. Marcus, the sheriff's deputy who escorted my parents off the property, brings his twin daughters in every single Sunday morning for enormous cinnamon rolls. My staff treats each other with profound respect. We celebrate birthdays with genuine joy, not forced obligation. We show up for each other during hard times without keeping a sinister running ledger of favors owed. This is my chosen family. They are people who love me exactly as I am, people who have never once demanded that I shrink myself to make them feel powerful. They never ask me to carry their emotional baggage, and they certainly never try to set my house on fire just to keep themselves warm. I finally have a home where I am not the spare tire, the insurance policy, or the invisible servant. I want to talk directly to the person listening to this right now. The one who is completely exhausted. The one who is carrying the impossible weight of a broken family because everyone else refused to do the heavy lifting. The one who is labeled the easy child, the mature one, the one who never made a fuss. True revenge against toxic family members is not about screaming at them in a driveway. It is not about writing them a 10-page letter detailing all the ways they failed you. It is about building a fortress of absolute boundaries that is so legally, financially, and emotionally bulletproof that when they try to strike you, they absolutely shatter their own wrists against your walls. If you are walking away from toxicity, you need to understand 3 undeniable rules about survival. Rule number 1 is the myth of the strong child. When a toxic parent calls you mature, independent, or strong, it is almost never a compliment. It is a utility label. It means they have successfully identified you as the child who requires the absolute minimum amount of maintenance. It means they know you will absorb the maximum amount of neglect, abuse, and manipulation without breaking character. They praise your strength, so they do not have to feel guilty about abandoning their responsibilities to you. You are not required to be their shock absorber anymore. Rule number 2 is the currency of boundaries. Society loves to tell us that we owe our parents everything simply because they gave us life. That is a dangerous, manipulative lie. You do not owe a financial or emotional debt for being brought into a world you did not ask to join, especially to people who made that world utterly hostile. Love that costs you your peace, your life savings, and your sanity is not love. It is extortion. Blood does not make you family. Loyalty, respect, and consistent kindness make you family. You are completely allowed to walk away from people who actively hurt you, even if you share a last name. Rule number 3 is the power of the pen. Emotional abusers thrive in the shadows. They operate on guilt, whispered threats, family secrets, and overwhelming social pressure. They expect you to fight them with tears and arguments because they know they can twist your words and play the ultimate victim. But when you drag their behavior out into the cold, harsh light of legal boundaries, formal trespass warnings, and brutal financial accountability, their power evaporates instantly. The law does not care about their manipulative tears. The law only cares about paper. Protect yourself with paper and watch the monsters turn back into pathetic, powerless cowards. If you are the one holding the family together at the completely devastating cost of your own soul, you have to ask yourself one question. When are you finally going to stop paying the debts they racked up? You have the absolute power to walk out the door and never look back. You have the right to build a fortress they are not allowed to enter. Drop a comment below if you have ever had to build your own walls to keep the toxic ones out. Tell me your story, because there is someone scrolling through the comments right now who desperately needs to know they are not alone. Share this video with someone who needs the absolute strength to finally say no to the people who take advantage of them. Subscribe to this channel to join the family we choose, not the one we are handed. Because true family never lets you be the one who is missing. I am Vanessa Bennett, and I am finally free.